The second reading comes to us from Romans. Now we know that whatever the law says, it speaks to those who are under the law, so that every mouth may be silenced, and the whole world may be held accountable to God. For no human being will be justified in his sight by deeds prescribed by the law, for though the law becomes the knowledge of sin. But now, apart from law, the righteousness of God has been disclosed, and it is attested by the law and the prophets, the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ for all those who believe. For there is no distinction, since all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. They are now justified by his grace as a gift through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus, whom God put forward as a sacrifice of atonement by his blood, effective through faith. He did this to show us righteousness, because in his divine forbearance, he had passed over the sins previously committed. It was to prove at the present time that he himself is righteous, and that he justifies the one who has faith in Jesus. Then what becomes of boasting? It is excluded. By what law? By that of works? No, but by the law of faith. For we hold that a person is justified by faith apart from works prescribed by the law. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
The Holy Gospel according to St. John, the 8th chapter. Jesus said to the Jews who had believed in him, "If you continue in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free." They answered him, "We are descendants of Abraham and have never been slaves to anyone. What do you mean by saying you will be made free?" Jesus answered, "Very truly, I tell you, everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not have a permanent place in the household. The Son has a place there forever. So if the Son makes you free, you will be free indeed." The Gospel of the Lord. You may be seated. Several months ago, when Pastor Tom and Deaconess Helena and myself were splitting up preaching assignments, I boldly volunteered to preach for this Reformation Sunday, this Reformation weekend. I did this because of my recent trip to Europe and especially to Germany, because they were in my mind. I thought I might produce a message that could use my experiences and photos as an interesting way to reflect upon our Reformation heritage as Lutherans. Of course, yes, of course, this is my wife here, Peg, so of course, as she knows, rather than sorting out my photos immediately, I succumb to my usual tendency to procrastinate, and waited until a couple of weeks ago to start seriously the choosing of photos and properly reflecting upon the observance and the texts and the other things that go with a special celebration like Reformation Day. But this week, between photos and technology, between memories and Luther's great hymn, "A Mighty Fortress," I realized that this goal was not working out very well. Now, that doesn't mean it will never work out, but maybe I can still share what I had hoped to later on when I'm not restricted by feeling it should be like a sermon or fit within the context of a worship experience. Yet it's interesting to me as well that God always seems to know our needs even before we ourselves. God often stands ahead of us before we even know what we need. My original plan for a meaningful message for this Sunday did not work out as I intended. Yet lying there in my files was a message I believe that is essential to our understanding of the gospel message, especially as that inspired the Reformation. And this is what you will hear this morning. As I introduced her, my wife Peg has graciously agreed to help make the story a little more interesting today. And I thank you, Peg, for helping me out today. God knows our needs even before we do. The psalm for this day says it well. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold, our refuge. So the following story comes from Pastor Steve Albertine of Indianapolis. And I've known Pastor Albertine since my first year at seminary, when he was one of the upperclassmen who was a small group leader of students taking, like me, their first course in Lutheran confessions. Now, I've got some doubts about where Steve may have found this story, but I'll let him introduce it in his own words. He says, I came across this story many years ago, so long ago that I no longer remember its precise origin. It demonstrates so well how the cure for our plight is justification by faith apart from works of the law. Hopefully, you will find it helpful in your own reflection. And perhaps it's no accident that the name of the main character is Martin, in honor of another Martin we remember on this Reformation Sunday.
This is the story of Martin and how he was cured. Martin was a very sick man. Martin was afflicted with a disease. It controlled him. It distorted his view of life and himself. It prevented him from seeing and admitting the truth about himself. It forced him into always making excuses for himself. Martin was afflicted with the dreaded Ja-Buts disease, but Martin didn't know it. He thought his Ja-Buts disease wasn't a disease at all. On the contrary, he thought it was a natural part of life.
The signs of Martin's Ja-Buts disease began to appear when he was a young boy in grade school. His affliction hardly seemed to be an affliction at all. Instead, it manifested itself as an uncanny ability to wiggle himself out of the most embarrassing of situations. It first appeared in these "yeah, but" conversations he had with those around him.
Martin, did you push this cookie jar over and make the mess on the kitchen floor?
Yeah, Martin replied, but someone had just freshly waxed the floor. When I stepped on the chair to reach the cookies, the chair slipped. Yeah, I made the mess, but it's the slippery floor's fault and not mine.
Martin, did you leave the TV floor in the shambles when you went to bed last night?
Yeah, Dad, I did, but I was going to clean it up, and I remembered that you told me I had to go to bed at 8 o'clock, and it was just 8 when I thought of it. So I thought I had better get to bed, just like you said.
Martin had lots of these "yeah-buts" conversation with his parents. Martin always had an answer. Martin always had an excuse. He always found some way to justify himself. It was becoming clear Martin had Ja-Buts disease. Martin's teachers also got involved in these "ja-buts" conversations with him. Martin, is it true that you don't have your math work done in time? Asked his teacher.
Yeah, Martin replied, but it's not my fault. You see, my mother made me clean up the cookie crumbs from the kitchen floor. And that was just when I was working on my math assignment. If you don't believe me, you can call and ask her.
It was clear that Martin had a full-fledged case of Yabut's disease. Martin had an excuse for anything and everything. He always had a justification for what he did. And his excuses and his justifications were always perfectly logical. Martin was never wrong, and he was always right. Just ask him. The problem was that this never being wrong and always being right got to be an obsession with Martin. It was taking over his life. It would eventually destroy him if something were not done to cure him of his dreaded disease.
Then, one day, Martin bought a new sports car. His friends, who knew anything about sports cars, were shocked.
Martin, oh Martin, they sighed. Why did you buy this model? Don't you know, Martin, it's a lemon? Everyone knows that, Martin. Boy, Martin, now you have made a real mistake.
Is that all you know about sports cars? Martin sneered back. I've checked out this particular model on the internet many times. This one has got the best rating of all sports cars. It gets more miles to the gallon. It handles, accelerates, and corners swell. It's got more interior room. It's got great resale value.
Martin stopped for a moment, and he thought, and he thought, and he thought, and then Martin, thoroughly afflicted with Yabut's disease, made a regrettable decision.
Get in, he said to his friends. They got in, and away Martin sped in his new sports car. Up and down the streets he flew, weaving his way through the traffic, squealing around the corners, and screeching away from stop signs like a maniac. Martin was having the time of his life, showing off his car and justifying his choice, proving his friends wrong, defending his freedom, when the familiar sound of a police siren sounded behind him.
Martin, I'm going to have to ticket you for speeding and reckless driving, the police officer said.
Yeah, officer. But I was just giving my friends a ride to show them what a great choice I made, Martin politely responded.
No buts, Martin. No excuses. You must appear in court before a judge at 9 o'clock on Monday morning to either pay your fine or contest your ticket.
Martin was shattered. He knew there was only one honest plea he could make. He was guilty. But people afflicted with Yabut's disease can't admit their guilt. They can't even say the word. They need to stay in control. There had to be a way out of this. Guilty, the word stuck in his throat. He could never say that word.
Monday morning arrived, and Martin's name was called to appear before the judge, accompanied by his court-appointed defense attorney. Martin didn't want an attorney. He wanted to defend himself. He was free to defend himself and wanted to show the judge how the officer was wrong and he was right. Why did he need an attorney? Didn't the judge think he was capable of defending himself? Things got even more confusing when the attorney asked him a question that caught him completely off balance. Martin, are you guilty? No more excuses. Just tell me the truth.
Martin seemed baffled by this question. He squirmed a little and then tersely responded, "Yeah, I got caught speeding. I was going a little fast, but you see, I was just showing my friends the new sports car I bought and what a good deal I got, and..."
Stop it, Martin, interrupted the attorney. This is no time for excuses. Face it, Martin, you got caught. You were guilty.
But Martin shot back, "What kind of defense attorney are you? You're supposed to defend me, prove my innocence. You're the strangest defense attorney I've ever met. And now you want me to admit my guilt without even trying to defend me?"
Yes, said the attorney, the very word Martin did not want to hear.
"This is crazy. I won't do it. I'm no fool."
The attorney spoke softly. Just trust me. I will defend you, but not like you think I should. No more yeah, buts. No more excuses. Just admit your guilt and trust me to help you.
No way. Once the judge hears me admit my guilt, I'm doomed. He will surely find me, maybe even put me in jail. No, I can't do it. I can't risk it.
But the attorney would not be dissuaded. Martin, you can trust me. Just no more excuses. No more yeah buts. You can trust me and admit your guilt. I will be able to save you.
Martin was bewildered. I don't get it. I have never heard of a defense like this one. There's no defense strategy at all. "Just trust me," he says. "Oh boy, Mr. Defense Attorney, you must have some really special kind of connections with the judge," sputtered Martin in disbelief.
I do, said the attorney, not blinking an eye. Martin, inquired the judge, how do you plead? Guilty or not guilty?
Martin was still unsure. Should he or should he not? Could he really trust the strange strategy of this utterly odd attorney? Could his promise be true?
Martin, I do not have all day. You are holding up the court. The judge was getting impatient. Martin, guilty or not guilty?
Just trust me. Very special connections to the judge? Maybe the promise was true. Sir, I am guilty as charged. Somehow Martin managed to get the word out. Then Martin heard
something that utterly shocked him. Yeah, Martin, you are guilty, but I am going to declare you innocent of all charges, said the judge rather matter-of-factly.
Martin could not believe what he had just heard. Yeah, but? That had always been his line, but now the judge is saying it. What is going on here? With an Judge?
Not believing.
Not believing what he had heard, Martin asked, but how can you declare me innocent of all charges after you have first heard me admit my guilt?
With an equally puzzled look on his face, the judge responded, but Martin, didn't you know? Your defense attorney is my son, my only beloved son. Anyone who trusts my son, anyone who is a friend of my son, they are okay with this court and with me. Yeah, Martin, you are a traffic offender, but you also have my son as your offense attorney. That's all that matters. You trusted him enough to stop your excuse-making. You trusted him enough to tell the truth. Well, that's enough for me, Martin. You are innocent, acquitted of all charges, case closed.
When Martin had entered the courtroom that day, He was a sick man. He was thoroughly infected with Yah-But's disease. He couldn't help but make excuses. He always had a reason for always being right, and he was never wrong. He always had to have his own way. That day, a destructive word had been rattling around inside his head. Guilty. People with Yah-But's disease can never say that word. But that incredible defense attorney was able to deliver on his promise.
And the judge said those wonderful words he never thought he would ever hear without first having to prove himself. You are innocent, acquitted of all charges, case closed.
Such words are powerful. They can change people's lives. They did.
The very next day at work, Martin's boss stormed into the office and shouted, "Who turned in this sloppy piece of work?"
The office was quiet. Everyone in the office knew who was responsible: Martin. But Martin always had excuses. He always had a reason as to why it was not his fault. But there was silence in the office. Then the workers heard for the first time words that they had never, ever heard from Martin's lips. "I did, sir."
And then it was round 20 of a Yah-But's argument between Martin and his wife, when Martin said something his wife had never heard from him before.
"I'm sorry. You are right. I'm wrong. Please forgive me."
Martin had been set free. The endless rounds of Yah-But's ended. The deadly hold of Yah-But's disease, of sin, had been broken. He was a new man. Those words he heard that day in the courtroom changed his life.